I think it's safe to say that Netflix is kind of everywhere these days, right?
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, it's not just a streaming service anymore. It
Right.
feels like it's become a full-blown global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I think for anyone who's interested in the entertainment industry or even just like how companies grow,
Hmm.
it kind of makes you wonder how they pull that off. How do you achieve that kind of worldwide reach?
Well, it is a question that I think has a lot of really interesting answers.
Right.
One of those answers, and one we're going to unpack for you today, is from Cognitive Market Research.
Okay.
They put out an article on March 18th, 2025,
Okay.
that dove pretty deeply into how Netflix has used market research as like a central part of their global expansion strategy.
Yeah, because this deep dive isn't just about listing off, the things that Netflix did right or the
Right.
shows that were works.
Exactly.
We want to really use this research to understand the how and the why behind their success,
Right.
right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, their worldwide reach is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the insights that they were able to glean that other companies maybe weren't?
Yeah, exactly.
And this article points to some specific areas
Okay.
where this market research was really instrumental. We're talking about how they were able to figure out what audiences around the world actually wanted to watch,
Right.
their adaptation to how people's viewing habits are changing, smart approaches to accessibility on different devices, and even the magic behind those personalized recommendations we see.
Okay, so let's start with the content itself,
Okay.
because that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? And it's pretty obvious that Netflix didn't just assume that what works in Hollywood is automatically going to work everywhere else.
No, they definitely didn't. And I think what's really insightful is, they moved beyond this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they really immersed themselves in trying to understand what different regions wanted. They considered cultural nuances
Yeah.
and the types of stories that resonated with people around the world.
Yeah, and this research led to some specific decisions that we can actually point to, right?
Yeah,
Um, for example, with Spanish language audiences,
right.
the research showed that there was a strong preference for crime dramas,
Hmm.
but they also saw that those audiences really responded to shows with like very well-developed characters and
Yeah.
like intricate storylines.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if
Yeah.
you look at something like Money Heist, right? Or La Casa de Papel,
Yeah.
that was a huge, huge hit nationally. And it was just because it was action-packed. There was a real sophistication to the
Yeah.
characters and the plot.
Right.
And you can see how that really resonated with the audience. And so understanding what kind of crime drama worked
Right. Yeah.
was key.
Absolutely. And then you have the explosion of South Korean content like Squid Game, which was just this incredible global phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
Is that another example where their research gave them a heads up or an advantage?
It seems like it, definitely. I think they were able to recognize the incredible storytelling talent and production quality
Hmm.
that went coming out of South Korea. Investing in a show like Squid Game wasn't just a gamble, it was a calculated decision, right? Based on data and an understanding of its potential to tap into universal themes like, social inequality was
Right.
a big theme, and it did that in a way that could transcend cultural boundaries. I mean, it's fascinating, because it took very specific Korean cultural elements,
Right.
but somewhat made them resonant on a global stage.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens, right?
Right.
When something so culturally specific can still appeal to such a wide audience.
Yeah.
And this research wasn't just limited to Europe and Asia, right? The article also talks about the work they did in India.
Exactly. I mean, India is a great example of, how Netflix was able to kind of tailor their approach. They understood that digital streaming was exploding in India
Yeah.
and invested in things like high-stakes crime series that were
Mhm.
very much rooted in the local culture and landscape.
Yeah.
And Sacred Games is a great example of that, which became this huge cultural phenomenon within India,
Yeah.
It shows that understanding a specific market goes beyond just language,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's about really understanding the nuances.
Absolutely. So it wasn't just about dubbing or subtitling existing content.
Yeah.
They were really making strategic bets on creating and acquiring content that was genuinely going to speak to a diverse audience. And
Exactly.
that made people feel like they were being catered to.
And they made them feel represented,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that was key for building loyalty in those regions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, it made people feel like this streaming platform was for them wherever they were.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't just this American company.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and
Uh,
talk about something that has really become synonymous with Netflix, releasing entire seasons at once.
right.
Was that also a decision that was driven by, like, this in-depth research and data?
I mean, it was definitely informed by a deep dive into consumer behavior.
Okay.
Traditional television, right,
Yeah.
was built on that weekly episode model.
Right.
But, Netflix looked at its own data, and it saw
Yeah.
that people were engaging with content differently.
So were they finding that people, like, preferred to just keep watching as opposed to waiting?
Yeah, basically, their data really suggested a
Yeah.
preference for continuous viewing, which
Yeah.
we now call binge watching.
Right.
And so that was really crucial in their decision to start releasing entire seasons simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I think, you could argue that they kind of pioneered this approach.
Yeah.
With House of Cards back in 2013.
Yeah, I remember that feeling so different.
Yeah, it was a game changer.
Yeah.
And the results speak for themselves, right?
Yeah.
It boosted engagement and, crucially, I think, improved subscriber retention.
Yeah. Because when you're already invested in an entire season,
Right.
you're much less likely to cancel your subscription after just a couple of episodes, right?
Yes.
I mean, we've all been there, right? Like, completely absorbed in a show like Stranger Things
Yeah.
or Bridgerton.
Yeah.
You lose a whole weekend to it.
Right.
And those are perfect examples of how powerful that kind of binge-worthy content can be.
Yeah, exactly. And by catering to that,
Yeah.
that kind of inherent desire for uninterrupted viewing, Netflix not only increased user satisfaction,
Uh-huh.
but it also fueled so much word-of-mouth marketing.
Right.
Because people could talk about a whole season with their friends
Yeah.
rather than just one episode, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And it created buzz
Mm-hmm.
and drove subscriber growth. I mean, they really changed how we consume entertainment.
It's so interesting to think about how something that feels so natural now was actually based on this, like, really insightful understanding of human behavior.
Right.
Okay, so they understood what we wanted to watch
Yeah.
and how we wanted to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
What about, like, the actual devices that people are using?
Yeah.
Because the article talks about their device-specific subscription plans. Right?
Yeah, and this is another smart part of their global strategy, I think, that
Yeah.
was really driven by market research.
Mm.
They looked at how people were accessing content in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And obviously, it varied quite a bit.
I could imagine, yeah.
But a key finding, especially in emerging economies, was that mobile phones
Okay.
were the main way people were accessing the internet
Right.
and therefore streaming content.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was just driven by affordability, right?
Yeah.
And accessibility of smartphones,
Yeah.
like compared to, computers or traditional TVs.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense when you think about the infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
in different parts of the world. So how did they adapt to that based on that understanding?
Well, they started introducing mobile-friendly subscription plans
Okay.
in places where mobile consumption was really high, like
Right.
India, Southeast Asia, and
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
A great example of this is the mobile-only plan
Okay.
that they launched in India in 2019.
Okay.
This was a lower-cost entry point specifically for people who
Okay.
were mainly watching stuff on their phones
Right.
and who, were probably a little bit more price-sensitive.
So they were basically making it more accessible to, like, a huge potential audience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the success of that mobile-first approach in India led to them kind of expanding that to other regions with similar patterns.
Yeah, so it was really about meeting the audience where they were, literally,
Literally, yeah.
on the devices they were using the most.
Yeah.
And offering a subscription model that made sense for their, like, economic reality.
Exactly. And I think it was really key for competitiveness
Yeah.
and for making sure that the platform was accessible to everyone.
Especially younger demographics and people who are new to streaming, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
by aligning the pricing and the accessibility with how people were actually consuming content,
Yeah.
they were able to, tap into a significant subscriber base that might not have been there otherwise.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about that feeling you get when Netflix seems to know exactly what you want to watch,
Right.
which is, a little bit eerie
It's
sometimes.
a little creepy,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But that's their recommendation system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which the article highlights as another example of how they're using this research and data.
Yeah, the algorithmic recommendation system is a
Yeah.
really good example of market research in action.
Okay.
By constantly looking at what you watch,
Yeah.
how you interact with the platform,
Yeah.
it's able to generate like super personalized suggestions.
So it's not just what I've watched, but like how long I watch it for
Yeah.
and what genres I tend to watch
Yeah.
and even things like time of day I'm watching, right?
Yeah, I mean, all that data goes into those little watch lists that you see.
Okay.
And it's fascinating to me because they're not just looking at your data, but
Yeah.
they're also factoring in global viewing trends, too.
Okay, so how does that play into my own personal recommendations?
Well, so, the article uses the example of Squid Game again.
Okay.
So let's say a show is suddenly super popular in the US.
Yep.
Because everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
The algorithm sees that. And it starts suggesting that show to people in other parts of the world who
Okay.
have similar viewing habits,
Gotcha.
even if they haven't specifically searched for that show.
Okay, so it's almost like a global curator, right?
Yeah, like a taskmaker, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's surfacing this content that's doing really well elsewhere
Mm-hmm.
to people who might also like it.
And it benefits both sides, right?
Yeah.
For the user, it enhances the viewing experience.
Yeah.
And helps people discover content. And for Netflix, it helps keep people subscribed because
Yeah.
they're constantly getting good suggestions.
Right. It's pretty remarkable. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to touch on
Okay.
was how Netflix doesn't just look at what we do on the platform,
Mm-hmm.
but they're also paying attention to what people are saying off the platform,
Yeah, definitely.
on social media,
Yeah.
in reviews, all of that, right?
I mean, it's another layer of market research, right?
Yeah.
They're looking at what's being said online
Yeah.
and analyzing it.
Yeah.
So they look at social media conversations, online reviews, viewer reactions to really get a sense of like
Yeah.
the overall sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like a constantly running focus group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Across the internet.
Yeah, okay, so if a particular show is generating a lot of buzz
Yeah.
or strong reactions, they know that immediately
Mm-hmm.
and can adapt accordingly.
They can pivot.
Yeah. Yeah.
The article gave the example of the movie Bird Box,
Okay.
which kind of unexpectedly blew up on social media.
Yeah.
And Netflix really capitalized on that.
Okay.
They started promoting memes
Okay.
and viral challenges
Yeah.
that were related to the movie.
Right, so they basically amplified that organic buzz that was already happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and turned fan enthusiasm into marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of it is it was free.
Yeah.
They didn't have to pay for expensive ad campaigns.
Right, yeah.
Because people were already talking about it.
So basically, by keeping a close eye on social media,
Yeah.
they were able to stay ahead of these trends
Mhm.
and kind of fine-tune their strategies.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's able to be really responsive, right?
Yeah.
To what's working.
Yeah, so they're constantly listening
Yeah.
to the conversation, basically. Okay, so, I mean, it sounds like Netflix takes a really sophisticated and data-driven approach to global expansion.
Yeah, definitely.
And the article really sums this up by saying that their ability to not just gather, but actually interpret and use this market research
Mm-hmm.
has been crucial to their success.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they've tailored what they offer, right?
Yeah.
You've adapted their pricing models.
Yeah.
They're constantly trying to make things better for the user.
Mhm.
And it all comes back to, understanding the consumer.
And that's what sets them apart from a more generic one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not the same everywhere.
Yeah, and I love how the article throws in this really striking fast fact.
Yeah.
It says that over 60% of Netflix's subscribers are now outside of the United States.
That's huge.
Yeah, so that's a clear indication that this global strategy is working.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And it really shows that this commitment to data-driven decision-making
Mm-hmm.
is a big reason why it becomes so dominant.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because if you understand your audience, you can build a competitive advantage.
Yeah, so I think the key takeaway here is that Netflix's global dominance is not an accident,
Yeah.
right?
No, it's not some lucky break.
It's this really complex, constantly evolving system that's based on information and research.
Exactly.
They're not just guessing.
Yeah.
They're figuring out what we want,
Right.
and then they're giving it to us.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to keep in mind,
Mm-hmm.
not just for people in the entertainment industry, but really anyone who's trying to reach a global audience.
Definitely. I mean, think about it, right? Like, how could these principles be applied to your own field of interest?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what are the needs and preferences of your audience?
Right.
How can you adapt to them?
Yeah.
And are you really leveraging data?
Yeah. And I think as data becomes even more readily available
Right.
and more sophisticated,
Yeah.
it really makes you wonder, how is this relationship between content creators and their audiences going to continue evolving?
It is, I mean, it is really fascinating. And, you wonder, like, what are the next strategies that are going to come out?
Yeah, that go even beyond what Netflix is doing.
Right, because they're not going to stop, right?
No, absolutely not.
So,
Yeah,
something to think about.
absolutely. Food for thought.
Food for thought.
Yeah.